So the next day when you came back to work, since you work in shifts, were it the same people that work with you?
Yes, the same people were
Did
there.
you guys talk about anything at all about the day before?
Not that I remember. I'm sure we did. I'm sure we discussed, this happened or that happened, and I wonder what happened with this or that. And I think there was discussion actually about how the victims were doing that the dispatchers had talked to on the phone. I know a couple of the dispatchers, including the trainee, talked to people who had been shot, and so there was concern that was voiced about what their conditions were.
You lead me to something else. Fielding calls from people who have been shot.
Yeah.
How did you guys respond to that or deal with that? Because it was not just one person, right?
No, it wasn't. We did had several calls from people who had been injured inside the building or who were with people who had passed that were inside the building. And I think the only way really that we, at least that I'm aware of, that we dealt with it or sort of hashed it out was to talk about it amongst ourselves. And I think there's a bit of a trust that grows not only from having worked together in the past, but working through that particular incident. And I think we all felt fairly safe being able to talk through concerns or worries that we had, or just sort of being amazed at the whole day. So
with that being said, at any point, were you concerned about any of your staff?
I was concerned about all of them, honestly. Later in the day, they had the counseling team come through, but it was a little bit weird and awkward because they were walking through the comm center as work was still going on, and it was kind of you couldn't just, if you really needed to talk to somebody, you couldn't just like up and leave because they were there doing the work. And so I think I probably would have preferred that we mandated that people took a break and walked in and just touched base with them rather than making it a voluntary thing. Just because there was so much commotion going on in the room, to have them present, I personally, if I had needed to talk with them, I would have been uncomfortable standing up and being obvious about going somewhere to talk with them.
And the other part, you guys are sort of in the middle of the action still.
Mm-hmm, that's exactly right. And to have them in there, I guess it's good if somebody was gonna, sort of succumb to the pressures of it. It would be good to have someone there so that the staff doesn't have to deal with that. But I think it could have been done a little more gracefully.
Or maybe a delay, like a week. I think
they were also available within the following week.
Mm-hmm.
The chief sent out an email saying that they were going to be available. There was going to be a group sort of debrief thing, and I want to say they were there, but I honestly don't know.
Did that actually occur?
Yeah.
There was a group. They called it a debrief. I don't really know what happened. I was on duty and wasn't able to attend.
Do you know if dispatchers attended any sort of debrief?
They were given the option.
So, in your experience, if you had wanted to, how difficult would it be able to do if you don't have enough people?
Very difficult. I think my opinion is, and this is me, after the fact, just saying what my opinion is, but I honestly think that the counseling debriefs and the group tactical debriefs should have been mandatory. Shouldn't have been a voluntary or an optional. That's just me.
Because there's a lot of validity to that, right? You lived it.
Yeah.
So it's one thing for us to have an intellectual discussion about, but it's another thing when you actually live it and say, hey, maybe we can look and see how we manage this.
Well, logistically, it is possible to have another agency take over your dispatching for an hour or two, just to care for the health of your employees.
You bring up something because, from a supervisory level, I know that we in California don't really do well with taking someone else's center over, maybe. What are your thoughts on that? Like, has there been any discussion? I know you're in a different county. I understand that. But has there ever been a discussion about if a critical incident happens in an allied agency that we would formulate, our own TERT team or response team?
I am super impressed with San Diego County. Just coming from the outside and now seeing this as a fresh perspective, and maybe nobody else is impressed, but I totally am impressed. Because El Cajon PD has a very tight relationship with La Mesa PD, And they run the same CAD system, the same phones, and can, at the drop of a hat, come over here and take over for us, and vice versa. And it's been thought out ahead of time in case that actually needs to happen. In fact, they're going next week to handle something for them over at their agency.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, and to have that done on a routine basis, not like a practice, but to actually have it in place practically is super important. Yeah.
So then you know that if you ever needed to have, yeah, my team can go. Just do what you need to do because we have somebody else who can manage your services.
The log-on aspects, the ability to pick up a phone and understand how to use it. It's already bought and taken care of.
Exactly.
You know,
their call signs are in our CAD already, and vice versa.
This may seem like a strange question, but did San Bernardino have body cameras?
They did not. They were in the process, I believe, when I was there. They did not have them, but they currently have them.
I was just curious, like what if I know there's an officer down feature and body cameras.
Yeah.
If they had body cameras, if they had that, if that was part of the policy.
As far as I know, nobody had any down there.
They had it
no, they do have it now. I know that it was in the last year that they brought them online.
The other dispatcher was on the admin channel, the secondary channel.
Yeah, Missy.
Who was responsible for identifying the resources, like the buses or where the triage area would be?
We had a fantastic lieutenant who was on the scene, Travis Walker. He's one of many fantastic lieutenants that were down there on that day. But he was sort of the logistics guy, and he did a fabulous job. Like, I can't even tell you in words that he managed things so well. And he's now at Cathedral City as the deputy chief.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So did you guys go straight into ICS?
Yes. Yeah. And initially the focus was on tactically getting into the building and getting at the people. But the ICS function happened sort of organically, and it managed itself basically.
You mentioned earlier that you had training as a tactical dispatch, right? Mm-hmm. Dispatcher. Mm-hmm. But were you or were your staff familiar with the concepts of like rescue task force? Like, did you know that they were going to pass by victims to stop the threat?
No,
or was that something you learned after?
Well, even after, I'm not sure that people think about that in dispatch. I think it would be helpful to know. I had a general idea, and I know at least two of the other dispatchers who were there that day had, one of which was definitely a tactical dispatcher, and the other one, I don't remember if she was or not. But they have a familiarization with that kind of a procedure. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't completely unusual, but I don't think it was anything that was talked about or...
Did that ever come up on the phone when you're dealing with a victim that was shot and the officers went by them?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No, I think, my guess is, because I know that a couple officers, after the fact we talked about it, they did talk to the victims and say, we know you're here, we have to go do X, Y, or Z, and then we'll be back, or somebody will be coming along behind us to take care.
Do you think it would have helped either the dispatcher or the victim if that could have been explained to them while they're on the phone?
That's a really good point. I don't know.
We had a previous discussion where you had heard and learned that some of the victims felt the questions by dispatch intake weren't necessarily the most appropriate according to the victim.
Right. From their perspective. Yeah.
That goes along the lines with explaining why I'm asking you this question so that the victim or the RP, reporting party, understands why they're being asked this question and the significance of that question.
The funny thing is that I actually think about that now in routine calls, because we ask a lot of very, just fire those questions at them and get them off the phone. And it's important to me now to take a second and say, I need to ask you these questions for this reason. So let's do these questions. And it makes the people we're speaking to understand why we're so curt and so just the facts. And it's helpful. And I think in this situation, I don't know if it would help to explain it or not. Because at that time, I don't know if a brain can actually process the reasons behind why the questions are asked. Who knows?
That's a good point.
That's an excellent point.
Let's not test it out.
No, not at all. I'm not interested in dispatching today.
No. And there was a question that was asked of a citizen who was inside the building. How many rounds did you hear? And from an outsider's perspective, I can see why that is just a really strange
but it helps
question.
You know if that's an automatic rifle or if
Yes,
it's a semi-automatic.
that's one thing. The
Yeah.
other thing is during times of crisis, I think we all know this, that you revert back to your training. And
Yeah.
our training is on the job training. During normal shooting experiences in the city of San Bernardino, it's important to know how many rounds are fired. And that's one of the questions you ask every time somebody calls in a shooting. Well, how many rounds did you hear? Because if it's just one, you're like, oh, maybe it's a firecracker. Or, you can sort of key in on specific points. And I think that question just came out because it's what was always asked.
And would you agree? What you think about the dispatcher who's on the phone? Sometimes we look down, or it's not. That's what I'm looking for. It's expected of a dispatcher to speak and to have downtime between questions.
Yeah.
We tend to be critical of a dispatcher who can't think of questions
Right.
when there's a lot of questions to be asked.
Yeah.
And so sometimes perhaps a dispatcher will fill the void with a
This is
question.
Yep.
So that
Or just to keep your
While
RP
they're trying to
engaged.
take something, yeah.
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 Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
That's
and
really
that's
true.
actually, it's a good skill to have. Just make your questions relevant, that's definitely helpful.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
Thank you for coming down.
Thank you very much.